even cake. So feel free to come join us every Wednesday, a little after 5, we get together and hang out and have dinner and then tape this that you see after that. So feel free to come and join us. I think we're having a good time working our way through the life of Jacob. And we are nearly done with the life of Jacob in Genesis. We've got just a couple more little things. We're going to deal with the stupidity of a couple of his boys. And then we're on to Joseph, which is a great study. So tonight, we're going to be back in Genesis chapter 31. Before we do, let's stop and pray. Lord, we want to hear your voice tonight, not the opinion of any man or group of men that have studied and written on this. We are counting on the inspiration of your Holy Spirit as we look into what's here, and we pray that you'll pull out of this short study the truths that you have for us, where we can base our life. We thank you, Lord. Amen. Well, if you remember, we left Jacob in a very precarious position. You might remember that a number of chapters ago, Jacob fled from his father's house. He went running away because he had stolen from his brother Esau. And his brother Esau said, "I'm going to kill him." And nobody had any reason to doubt that Esau would actually do that. I think that we could be pretty confident that Jacob wouldn't have been Esau's first person. So he fled from him after swindling his birthright and stealing his blessing. His mom had said, "Go to your uncle Laban, my brother, for a few days until Esau's anger cools off." And his father said, "Don't take a wife from the people around us. Go back and take a wife from the people of the east, from where we're from." And so off he went to Uncle Laban to wait for his brother to cool off and to find a wife. You might remember that he did not only find one wife, he found two of them. Not on purpose. He was swindled by his Uncle Laban. The swindler was swindled. And not only did he end up with two wives, but we had talked quite a bit about polygamy in the Bible and discovered that it's not a good thing and it's not ever mentioned as a good thing. And because of the competition of these two wives, he also ended up with two concubines. And 14 years after that, he has 11 sons and at least one daughter. Now, you might remember that after that 14-year period, he said to Uncle Laban, "Send me away. I've worked for you for 14 years. I'm ready to go home to my homeland, literally to my native land," which is a word that's based on the concept of nativity. That is, that's where he was born. I want to go back to the land where I was born, and I want to go back to my father's household. And Laban said, "Why don't you stay?" He said, "Let me give you some compelling reason to stay." He said, "I have learned through divination that I'm being blessed by Yahweh God because of you. Name your price." And Laban said, Jacob said, "In these 14 years I have worked hard for you, and your flocks and herds have been enriched, but my own household hasn't been enriched at all. I need to make some money that I can put in savings. I need to build an estate for my 11 sons." And so they made a deal that Jacob would continue to watch over Laban's flocks and herds, and that any of basically the reject animals would go to Jacob. They understood just enough about genetics to think that if a striped lamb had babies, they would be striped. Or if a speckled lamb had babies, they would be speckled. They weren't entirely correct in their thinking, but they were pretty close. And so that's what they agreed to. And we'll find out here in just a little bit that that was the original, well, we found out last week that was the original agreement, and Laban immediately worked to cheat Jacob right off the bat out of any wages that he should have gotten at that point. And then we'll find out here in a little bit that he continued to cheat Jacob out of these wages for the next 6 years. Well, we also saw that during that 6-year period, while Jacob was working for Laban in this way, God continued to bless Jacob, and he became very wealthy. The striped and spotted flocks and herds grew like crazy, God continued to bless him. He needed some help, and so he purchased help. You didn't just hire help in those days, you purchased them. And so he purchased manservants and maidservants and people to take care of his flocks and herds. And he also needed some equipment. So he went down to the John Deere tractor dealer and bought mules and camels and other similar farming equipment. And he became quite wealthy. Now, while he was becoming more and more wealthy, Laban's flocks and herds weren't really growing that much anymore. That blessing that Laban had been receiving, well, he kind of cheated himself out of it. And Laban was becoming more and more unhappy with Jacob, and Laban's own sons were feeling like Jacob was stealing from them, and Jacob was starting to get very uncomfortable. In the midst of that, God came to him, and we'll read about that in 31:13. God came to him and said, Jacob, I want you to leave your Laban's family, Laban's land, and I want you to go back to your own native land, go back to your father's household. So Jacob called the family conference, and out to the field come Leah and Rachel, his wives, and he explains the situation to them about how he was being cheated by Laban. He explains how he is being looked on suspiciously by Laban and his sons. And he explained how God had said it was time to go, and so they were going to go. Now, there is a proper way to do this. There's a proper way to go. The proper way to go would be to go to Laban, in whose household he lives, and to set a time. I'll be leaving this fall, say. And to take your time with your long goodbyes. That was what hospitality required in those days. That was just common. It's kind of like if you're at somebody's house in Wisconsin, and you've been there for dinner, and you've been there most of the evening, and they go, "Welp," and stand up, you know it's time for you to leave. You don't have to think about that. That's how it works. Well, there was a proper way of parting, and Jacob didn't do it. You might remember that Jacob waited until Laban had taken a 3-day journey off into his own fields for the purpose of shearing his sheep, which could take a few weeks, that Laban would be gone now for basically the better part of a month. And 3 days into that, Jacob split. He had prepped his household so that when he said it's time to go, they were able to pack all the U-Haul camels and get out of there. They fled. Just as he fled to get there, he fled to leave. And you might remember that Laban was not particularly happy about this. We will pick it up here. Let's see. We will pick it up here in about verse 22. But before we do, there's a couple of things I want to mention. Well, there's really only one thing that's really important to mention in that review, and that's in verse 19. When Laban had gone out to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household idols. That's a little idol called teraphim or teraphim. They were little carved or cast little creatures that the people of the house would bow down to. The divination that Laban talks about was divination before these little idols. You'd cut a log down, you'd cut most of it up for firewood, but you'd save a little part to call it your god. And you could have a craftsman build you these things. You could build them yourself. They were little household gods. Now understand that there are a couple of reasons that Rachel took these, I'm thinking, in my mind. Reason number one, she's trying to have more kids. Remember this? She's desperate to have more kids. She has Joseph. Remember what she calls Joseph? His name, Joseph, it means, may Yahweh add. In other words, I want another one. And I would imagine that she was trying anything she could. Any god that she felt like would listen, including these little household gods. She was desperate for this. And there's a second thing. You remember how Jacob swindled the birthright away from his brother. And you remember what the birthright was? It was basically a double portion of inheritance. So there were two brothers. The inheritance would be split three ways. One would get 2/3 and the other one would get 1/3. And that 2/3 was given because the person who received that birthright, that 2/3, was responsible for the father's household. So he's got to take care of mom and dad as they get old. He's got to take care of all of dad's men servants and maid servants. I mean, he really doesn't build his own household as much as enrich his father's household. So he's given extra to be able to do that. That's how that worked. In the culture of the Eastern Aramean people, these little teraphim had some inheritance rights. The one who receives these, almost like the birthright, the one who receives these at the time of inheritance kind of becomes the leader of the family. I don't know if Rachel was thinking about that when she took them, but these are both rather important issues. She's taken Laban's spiritual connection, as it were, and she's also taken something of great material wealth. Well, we'll pick it up in 22. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So Jacob fled. Somebody from his household saw it. It took him 3 days to get to Laban. So Laban took his relatives with him and pursued Jacob for 7 days and overtook him in the hill country of Gilead. Why? Why is Laban chasing him down? I mean, what is he upset about that he's chasing him down? Did Jacob take anything that wasn't his? He didn't tell him goodbye. Yeah, like in Cars 2, or was that, which Cars movie? Yeah, is that Cars 1? Where Mater didn't get to tell Lightning goodbye? Yeah, maybe. I wish it was that easy. I wish it was that easy. We're going to find out here in just a minute. We'll find out here in just a minute. Verse 24. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night. Watch yourself, God warned him. Note that this is not the personal name of God. Laban doesn't know God personally, and God's not introducing himself. Watch yourself. Don't say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. That phrase, either good or bad, literally means going from good to bad. In other words, don't say, oh, Jacob, I missed you. Oh, you should have said, I didn't get to say goodbye, Jacob. And now that I have you in my clutches, let's talk about what really is bothering me. Just don't do that. Apparently that had been Laban's plan. And God said, don't do that. We'll see how Laban interprets that. Verse 25. When Laban overtook Jacob, Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban and his relatives also pitched their tent in the hill country of Gilead. Quite literally, they pitched their tents opposite. That's what the language tells us. They pitched their tents opposite in the hill country of Gilead. That is an expression of a military campaign. They came upon them. They were camped, say, on one side of a valley. And Laban and his people camped on the other side of the valley facing them. Now, if they were coming just in peace, don't you think they would have just approached? Oh, hey, Jacob. But instead, they set it up so they're in opposition. Laban wants Jacob to know that he's there to kick his fanny, that he's there to make war. Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You have deceived me and taken away my daughters like prisoners of war." Hold on a second. Did Jacob take away Laban's daughters? Well, I mean, technically they were Laban's daughters, but remember, Jacob purchased them. They no longer belonged to Laban. They're his wives. Legally, he can take them anywhere he wants. Laban has no more claim on them. You've taken them away like prisoners of war, as though we're in a battle, and you have taken from my household people who belong to me. Interesting. That's how Laban views this. It's a war. It's a battle. And Jacob has retreated with things that belong to him. Verse 27, Why did you secretly flee from me, deceive me, and not tell me? I would have sent you away with joy and singing, with tambourines and lyres. Would he have? Come on, what happened last time Jacob tried to get away? But you didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters. In other words, I didn't get to say goodbye. You have acted foolishly. I could do you great harm. That was his intent. I had come to say, you didn't let me say goodbye. Let me say goodbye. Now I'm going to grab everything I want. Oh, we'll see here in a minute. I could do you great harm, but last night the God of your father said to me, watch yourself. Don't say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long for your father's family. So basically, I'm not going to say anything to you about this, but listen to this. But why have you stolen my gods? So that's the issue. Laban is seeing that the teraphim are gone, and he's saying, Jacob is laying claim to my whole estate. Jacob is saying, I'm the inheriting son. And he is remembering that Jacob did the same thing to his own brother. That's the issue. 31, Jacob answered. Well, that and the fact that Laban still claims all that stuff is his. 31, Jacob answered, I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. Jacob is acknowledging that. He is acknowledging that Laban thinks they belong to him. Now, here's the really interesting thing. Jacob answered, I was afraid. He's afraid of Laban. But what do we know? That he just got done telling Rachel and Leah out in the field. Your father has tried to harm me 17 different ways, but every time he tries to harm me, the God of my father steps in and protects me every time. God has been faithful. God has watched out for me. Oh, if it wasn't for God, your father would have harmed me. But no, God has been taking care of me all along. And now God has called me to go back to the land that I came from, and he said he will be with me. And yet Jacob is afraid of Laban. That's really interesting. Does Jacob feel that Laban is more powerful than his God? Certainly not. Something really interesting going on with Jacob, something developing here that will come to the end here at the end of this chapter as we continue to study about Jacob and his attitudes. So I was afraid you would take your daughters away from me by force, verse 32. Notice he doesn't say my wives. Interesting. Verse 32. However, if you find your teraphim with anyone here, he will not live. Before our relatives, point out anything that's yours and take it. Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the idols. What do you think she's thinking now? Uh-oh. Hot water. So I love the way this story is told. This is like total movie buildup here. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, Leah's tent, and the tents of both concubines, but he found nothing. After all of that, Rachel's his little girl, his pretty little girl. She couldn't possibly do any wrong. Like my dog Timothy, he never does anything wrong, unless you ask my wife. After he'd gone into everybody else's tent that he had accused, he figured he was going to find him in Jacob's. Finally, he goes into Rachel's tent. Now, Rachel had taken Laban's household idols and put them in the saddlebag of the camel and sat on them. Now, she's required to stand in his presence. That's the way it works. Well, she's sitting on there, and Laban came in and searched the whole tent and found nothing, and she's still sitting on the saddlebag, and she says, don't be angry with me, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I am having my period. Now, she's learned from the best. Come on. Laban is the best con man out there. And she is calling on the one thing he cannot verify. He is not going to verify or deny this one fact. He has to just take her at her word. I find that really interesting because of all the trouble she's had having children. And this is the thing she thinks to call on. It just makes me wonder what's going on in her mind. Well, Laban searched but could not find the household idols. And here comes Jacob. I got to tell you what. There's a lot of times I really don't like Jacob, but I really like the way he responds to Laban here. I know I'm not supposed to because he flips his lid and you're not supposed to like that. But man, this guy is on point here. Verse 36. Then Jacob became incensed. I looked up that word, incensed, to find out what the Hebrew word was and what it really means. And I find that that is a really good word for it. It would literally be something like burning with hot fury. I like that. I like that. The word incensed, of course, it's an adjective, but there's a verb that's related to it that means to contend one-on-one, as in battle to the death, but with words. Oh, I like that. He took the man on. And this is what he says. Or I would maybe say bellers. What is my crime? He said to Laban. What is my sin that you've pursued me? He knows Laban is pursuing him to do him harm as though he had done some wrong. You've searched all my possessions. Have you found anything of yours? Remember how he said, if you look through my flocks and herds and you find anything that's not striped or spotted, it's yours? Have you found anything that's yours? Put it here before my relatives and yours, and let them decide between the two of us. I've been with you these 20 years. Your ewes and female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. I did not bring you any of the flock torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. You have demanded payment of me from what was stolen by day or by night. This would be the kind of thing that you would do to a hired man, not to a member of your own family. If you had a hired man that was hired to watch over your flock, and wolves came in and took a sheep, well, then the hired man would have to pay for that. But not your own family. But Laban has treated him like a hired man. Verse 40, there I was, picture it. The heat consumed me by day, and the frost by night, and sleep fled from my eyes. I think he's being a little dramatic, but I love it. For 20 years in your household I served you, 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, listen to this, the fear of Isaac had not been with me, certainly now you would have sent me off empty-handed. But God has seen my affliction and my hard work, and he issued his verdict last night. Wow, I love that. The fear of Isaac. That's what Jacob refers to him as, the fear of Isaac. I love that. The God of Abraham. Great, we understand that. The fear of Isaac. In other words, the one that Isaac revered continuously all the time, unfailingly revered. The one that Isaac served as if under the penalty of death, continuously without turning away. Not a scared kind of fear, but a sacred kind of fear. A deep reverence. A kind of worship that is more than just a worship service. A kind of worship that is reflected in his life. When Jacob thought about his father Isaac, he said he continually served at the feet of God beyond simple dedication. Isaac depended on him even to the death. That's fantastic. The fear of Isaac. Jacob remembers the thing about his dad that he remembers the most is that he continually bowed before Yahweh God. That is fantastic. I would hope that my kids would think that of me. And he knows that wherever Isaac is, and whatever Isaac is doing right now, and whatever situation he is right now bowing before Yahweh God, depending on him entirely, serving him completely without turning away. That's amazing. The fear of my father Isaac. That's great. He's going to call him that again. I love it. He says, if that God had not been with me, certainly now you would have sent me off empty-handed. That's what he's been afraid of all this time. That's why When he went to leave, he waited until Laban was gone, because he was afraid that if he left Laban's household and went to take what was his wives, his sons, his flocks and herds, that Laban would withhold all that stuff and he would get sent away with nothing. What if that had happened? What if that had happened? Didn't he go to Laban with nothing? Didn't God provide him with a family, with 11 sons and at least one daughter, likely many more? Didn't God provide him with flocks and herds beyond his wild imagination? And tractors and trucks and all the stuff necessary to make that happen? Didn't God provide him with all of that? So what if Laban would have been a real pain in the neck, and God would have said to Jacob, go ahead and go anyway? If he would have feared and revered his God like Isaac did, it would have been fine. Wendy and I have been talking about Job these last days, and how Job quite literally lost everything. He lost everything except his annoying, nagging wife. He lost everything. He's probably like, God, maybe we make a trade real quick? But anyway, Job never knew why. And we read chapters 1 and 2 in Job, and if you haven't, I recommend it. We read chapters 1 and 2 of Job, and we know exactly what's going on, and we're rooting for Job the whole time. And so is God. Job doesn't know this. Job doesn't know that God is protecting him. All Job knows is that the world has collapsed around him. And he really wants to be in the presence of God. And God comes and shows himself to Job, and Job says, oops, I should have never said anything. And he is then satisfied. He's then satisfied because he's been in the presence of God. And then God replaces everything Job lost. I find that so interesting. What if Jacob would have said, you have called me to go back to my father's household. I would like to take my family and all my stuff, but you have called me, and I'm not going to let the attachment to my family and all my stuff keep me from doing what it is you've called me to do, even if it costs me everything. I mean, that's true surrender. Even if it costs me everything, I'm not going to let my fear of the world hold me back. To the point that, Lord, if it does cost me everything, I'm going to trust you to replace it all. Hey, Lynn, could you go grab me a water bottle? Thank you. What if he would have done that? He would not have been afraid of Laban, not for a minute. He would have gone to Laban and said, my God, the God of Abraham and the fear of my father Isaac, has called me to go. And I would like to take my family and all my stuff and leave. And what could Laban have done to him? Absolutely nothing. Because God was protecting him. But even if he had, I love Habakkuk. I think that's my favorite. It's definitely my favorite of the minor prophets. Might be my favorite prophetic book of all time, Habakkuk. Because Habakkuk goes to God and says, God, what in the world are you doing? And God says, dude, you don't want to know. And he says, I'm waiting for an answer. So God says, all right, here's what I'm doing. And Habakkuk says, I wish I didn't know. But here's what I do know, God. Even if there are no grapes on the vine, even if there are no cattle in the stall, in other words, if everything I'm counting on fails, still I will praise you. I mean, there's a guy who's satisfied, whether he's got it or not. And I think that Jacob could have been that guy. Nonetheless, I probably would have been more like Jacob than Habakkuk, unfortunately. So, thank you. So, Jacob absolutely loses it and tells Laban off. And honestly, Laban deserves it. I kind of like that moment, to be honest. So, he gets done, and I love the fact that he calls on the justice of God here. He says, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, had not been with me, certainly now you would have sent me off empty-handed. But God has seen my affliction and hard work, and he issued his verdict last night when he told you to keep your mouth shut around me. He issued his verdict. And Laban's kind of backed into a hard place, and he says to Jacob, The daughters are my daughters, the sons my sons, and the flocks my flocks. Everything you see is mine. I had a moment like that. My son, as you know, lives in Caldwell, Middleton, Idaho. And he had been going to Northwest Nazarene University and studying there, and he'd been living on campus, and we couldn't afford to have him on campus. And in selling our house to come here, we were able to buy a little house over in that area that he could live in, and it was actually cheaper to do that than to pay to have him live on campus. It was crazy. Anyway, so he was moving to his house. And as he was moving to his house, I was with teenagers somewhere. Camp. Was it at camp? Anyway, so he took my cargo trailer and he loaded a bunch of my tools and a bunch of my furniture and my refrigerator and a bunch of my stuff into that trailer, and then he hooked it up to his truck and he drove it to Idaho. And then he unloaded it and started setting up his house, and then I got there about a week and a half later to help him get the house set up and do the work on it. It needed work, and we did the work. And we got all done after a week of all day and all night replumbing this house so that he could live there. Nice little house other than that. And I walked through the house after we were done, and I looked around and I said, the furniture is my furniture. The pictures on the walls are my pictures. The tools are my tools. The vehicles are my vehicles. And I remember as I'm walking around thinking, that's exactly what Laban felt like. Laban looks around and he says, this is my household that the man has. But what can I do? What can I do? He says, what can I do today for these daughters of mine and the children they have borne, still claiming ownership over them? And then he says to Jacob, come now, let's make a covenant, you and I. Let it be a witness between the two of us. Wow, sounds like he's going for a peace offering, doesn't it? Sounds like, oh yeah, let's... No, that's not what's happening at all. Keep reading. So, Jacob picked out a stone and set it up as a marker, and he said to his relatives, that would be his sons, his wives, the people who live in his household, gather stones. And they took stones and they made a mound, and there they ate by the mound. Laban named the mound Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob named it Galeed. This was actually a pretty common concept in that time, to take the stones and make kind of like a square pyramid. And we see ruins of these things quite often. It's a marker. It's a big marker. And the purpose of the marker, Laban says, is a witness between you and me today. That's why it was called Galeed, which in Hebrew means mound of witness, or Mitzpah, which means witness heap. Interestingly enough, Jegar Sahadutha is the only Aramaic term in the Torah. It's the only time there's Aramaic in the Torah. The writer here is making a clear distinction between the people of God and the people of the world, which we're going to see again. Even though Laban was from the same family, the same bloodline, if you will, the writer is making a clear distinction between the people who follow Yahweh God and the people who don't. Keep that in mind as we keep reading. So the place was called Galeed and also Mizpah. For he said, that would be Laban, may Yahweh watch between you and me when we are out of each other's sight. If you mistreat my daughters or take other wives, though no one is with us, understand that God will be a witness between you and me. He's not saying, let's make a covenant of friendship. So let's make a covenant of accountability and responsibility. Laban also said to Jacob, look at this mound and the marker I have set up between you and me. Who did the marker, by the way? Wasn't that Jacob and his relatives? Yeah. Laban is something else, ain't he? This mound is a witness, and the marker is a witness that I will not pass beyond this mound to you, and you will not pass beyond this mound and marker to do me harm. In other words, we have drawn a border line. You are on one side of this marker, and I am on the other. And as God is my witness, like Laban's ever cared about that before, you better take good care of these children of mine. That's the one decent thing I see about Laban is he still cares about his daughters. The purpose of this covenant is not friendship, like we see between Abraham and the people of the land, or Isaac and the people of the land. The purpose of this covenant is, you stay on your side, I'll stay on my side, you don't mess with me, and I probably won't mess with you, is the purpose of the covenant. Laban also said to Jacob, let's see where we are in Witness Mound. Verse 53. Back to verse 52. This mound is a witness, and the marker is a witness that I will not pass beyond this mound to you, and you'll not pass beyond this mound and this marker to do me harm. And then he says, the God of Abraham and the gods of Nahor, the gods of their father, will judge between us. You might remember that Nahor was a pagan. And Laban certainly remembers this and calls on them. And Laban gives as much credit or as much creed to those gods as he does to Yahweh God. But Jacob, verse 53, swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and that's all. Just as Isaac has lived under the hand of Yahweh God, just as Isaac has depended on him, relied on him, and served him even to the point of death, so I'll do the same. And I promise you, Laban, that as I'm doing the same, I won't mess with you. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited his relatives to a meal. So they ate a meal and spent the night on the mountain. This would be a pretty normal way of finishing a covenant, except that normally both parties would bring something to sacrifice. So Laban should have brought something and Jacob should have brought something. And if for some reason Laban didn't have anything, say he just traveled for 7 days and didn't have anything, then he's supposed to purchase from Jacob something to offer. That's the way it works. I mean, this is a covenant. This is not Laban's the king and Jacob's the servant. In this covenant, they're both supposed to be equals. So they're both supposed to provide something. But here's Laban saying, I built this mound that Jacob built. And here's Laban saying, oh, I see you're cooking up some lamb. I'll join you in that. The guy is just a snake. But they ate the meal. They spent the night on the mountain. Verse 55, Laban got up early in the morning, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and blessed them. And then Laban left to return home. And that is the last we hear of Laban. He no longer matters to the story. Jacob is in an interesting place. He is still on the east side of where the Jordan River flows. He's not that far south yet. He's still north. He's got to head south because of the route that he's taken. He's got to head south of what we would call the Sea of Galilee, down into an area that is currently the country of Jordan, the present-day country of Jordan. He's got to head down into there and then go down toward the Dead Sea, where the Jordan River flows less, and cross there into the land of Isaac. And Isaac is living, if you might remember, right in that south area there. His other option is to go down south of the Dead Sea and cross over there in the Negev Desert. Any way you look at it, he's got to come down the east side of the Jordan River. Now, there's a problem with that. There is an area there that we know of as Mount Seir. It became the nation of Edom. Now, we've talked about the nation of Edom before. Do you remember that? Esau was the founder and namesake for the nation of Edom. Remember, his name means hairy, and Edom means red. And hairy was his name, and red was his nickname, and his nation became known as Red, Edom. Now, we've talked about this land before because we talked about the city of Petra. And that's actually a really, believe it or not, an important city in Scripture. And it's going to come back up again when we make it to the book of the Revelation, which should be in what, maybe 6-9 months? When we make it there, we'll talk again about the city of Petra. We'll also talk about it in, is it Ezekiel, I think. Nonetheless, we're going to talk about the nation of Edom quite a bit. Now, the nation of Edom didn't exist yet, but in the Mount Seir range, Esau had gone and settled. And Jacob had gotten word of this. And we're going to see in a couple of minutes that Esau has an army. He's going to go find Jacob with 400 armed men. There are a lot of theories about how this happened. It's possible that Esau, like Jacob, he had 3 wives. He could have had a lot of sons. Enough years have gone by now. They could have grown up. They could have become very wealthy. Flocks and herds, just like Isaac. They could have built themselves a small nation, kind of like Abraham did. But that's not what most historians think happened. Most historians think that Esau went and took this land. That there were some kind of nomadic tribes over there, probably Ishmaelite tribes, and that Esau went and took them. Do you remember what Isaac said to Esau when he went to bless him back in 27 verse 39 and 40? His father Isaac answered Esau, "Look, your dwelling place will be away from the richness of the land, away from the dew of the sky above." Well, that would pretty well describe the region that he went to, the Mount Seir region. All of Jordan is not desolate, but certainly the Mount Seir region is, and it's dry. "You will live by your sword," Isaac says to him. And most historians feel that that's how he got this land, that Esau went over and conquered it. Now, this is a big deal. And Jacob knows about this. Word would have gotten, they didn't have Facebook back then, but word got around. Jacob knows that to the south of him, directly in front of him, is this land of Mount Seir where his brother has conquered and rules. And directly behind him, to the north and to the east, he can't go anymore. Laban is back there protecting that border. He's quite literally stuck between a rock and a hard place. What's he going to do? Jacob does not have a trained army. Jacob has 11 sons, the oldest of which might be 19. And he has lots of flocks and herds. And he has servants that are farmers. This is what he has. He didn't have an army. Laban has an army. Esau has an army. Jacob got nothing. What's he going to do? He's in a very difficult and precarious position. Now, he's in this position because he feels like he's being led by his God to be there. He feels like this is what God has called him to do. And so we read these words in 32. "Jacob went on his way, and God's angels met him. When he saw them, Jacob said, 'This is God's camp.' So he named that place Mahanaim, a word that literally means two camps." What's that all about? Oh, I tell you what, 32 is the most cryptic chapter, I think, in all of Genesis. What in the world is going on here? That word, God's angels met him. It's the word Malachi. Have you heard that word before? Oh, yeah. Last book of the Old Testament, Malachi. That wasn't his name. Malachi wasn't his name. Malachi is a term that means messenger. That's all it is. God's messengers met him. And he saw that there was a camp of them. What could possibly be going on here? Who knows? Except we see a similar happenstance in 2 Kings chapter 6. You remember 2 Kings chapter 6? Elisha, the prophet, has been commanded by the armies of Aram, the Arameans. Hey, we were just dealing with an Aramean, weren't we? They're commanded by the armies of the Arameans to come out or we're going to get you. And Elisha has a servant who looks out Elisha's front door and sees that the house is surrounded by this huge army. A SWAT team is one thing. Imagine the entire National Guard around the house saying, "Come out with your hands up." And the servant says, "Oh no, they got us. We're all going to die." And Elisha says, "God, would you open his eyes?" And he looks up and he sees the camp of the messengers all around the army of the Arameans. The camp of the messengers is the armed servants of God. He's like, "Oh, I used to be worried, but I'm not anymore." It would be kind of like, the National Guard comes to your house, the Alaska National Guard comes to your house. That'd be pretty scary. But then the entire U.S. military, not just the Army and the Navy, but also the Marines, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard, are all surrounding them on your behalf. So Jacob meets the camp of the messengers. And he says, there's two camps. Here I thought I was all alone. Here I thought nobody was helping me. Here I thought if I go back, I get killed. If I go forward, I go killed. But now I find out that God is here protecting me. He has sent his messengers, a whole camp of them. I thought there was just one little camp, but it turns out there's two. That's fantastic. Wow, what would you do if you were Jacob right then? Would you just breathe deeply? Thank you, Lord. Looks like everything's going to be just fine. Yeah, not if you were Jacob. Verse 3. So Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the territory of Edom, and he commanded them, You are to say to my lord Esau. This is a form of humility. I'm trying to be humble to Esau. You are to say to my lord Esau, this is what your servant Jacob says. I have been staying with Laban, and I have been delayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female slaves. I have sent this message to you to inform you, my lord, in order to seek your favor or to seek your grace. In other words, I want to pass through your land. I have a lot of stuff. I want you not to mess with my stuff. And I want you to know that I don't need any of your stuff. I'm not coming to take from you, nor am I coming to give to you. I'm just coming to pass through. That's pretty good. He's doing okay so far. He's got the camp of the angels. He's doing okay so far. He thinks maybe it's going to be okay. Well, when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you. Jacob's like, really? That's not good. I was hoping he was just going to say, yeah, pass through. I never want to see you again. No, he's coming to meet you, and he has 400 men with him. The implication is armed men there. He's bringing an army with him. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Do you think so? What did Esau say last time he saw him? I'm going to kill you. And now that you've got flocks and herds and servants and donkeys and camels and all this other stuff, not only am I going to kill you, I'm going to take all them. This is what Jacob hears. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people with him into two camps, along with the flocks, herds, and camels. He thought if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, the remaining one can escape. This is actually, I learned in studying this, still a very common way that the Bedouin tribes defend themselves. You know, they stay together as a big group, and you'd think that like there's safety in numbers, right? But if somebody comes to get them, they split up. Interesting. And this was a tactic that Jacob decides to use. I find this interesting. Jacob has seen the camp of God. Jacob has sent a note to his brother asking for safe passage. When his brother comes with 400 armed men, Jacob starts making defensive plans. After all of that, Jacob decides maybe he should pray. After all that, which is the same thing we do, right? We make our plans, we take our steps, and then we're like, oh, by the way, God, could you help me out here? I wonder what would happen if back when he realized God has protected me from Laban. I mean, remember, God came and talked to Laban. God has protected me from Laban. And now God has sent the messengers, the other camp. I don't have anything to worry about. I think I'm going to go to God right now and say, you know what, God, I see what you're doing for me, and I thank you, and I'm safe with you, and I'm just going to rest with you. That would have been awesome. That would have required something Jacob is really struggling with. That would have required some real surrender. That would have required him to say, I can't handle this on my own, God. We're going to talk about that a little bit more on Sunday. There's this phrase that the Mormons like to use that really bothers me. It's in their book of 2nd Nephi. I think it's chapter 31, if I remember right, but I could be very wrong because I am not an expert at all in the Book of Mormon. It says, and it doesn't just bother me, it bothers a lot of Mormons. They have big seminars trying to figure out this phrase. It says, we are saved by grace after all we can do. Well, when I read that, it was written in English, so I read it in English. When I read that, it tells me that they have this belief that we need to do everything we can do And when we've run out of everything we can do, God makes up the rest. And I want you to know that's incredibly wrong. We're going to be talking about that on Sunday. That's just not right. We see Jacob doing that here. We're going to see him continue to do that. He's making his plans. He's setting things into motion. He's figuring out what he needs to do. And then when he thinks he's developed a pretty good plan, and we're going to see the rest of his plan flesh out here in a minute, when he thinks he's developed a pretty good plan, but he can see there's gaps in the plan, he goes to God to cover the gaps. I don't think that's best. The grace of God requires a certain level of humility. It requires us to say, there is nothing that I can do to affect my situation. In reality, all I can do is continue to mess things up. There is so little that I control. The one thing I can control is, who am I going to trust? Where am I going to look? Am I going to continue to trust in myself, or am I going to trust in you? And it requires a tremendous amount of humility and surrender to say, I'm just going to trust in you. Rather than do as much work as I can and hope for the best, what I'm going to do, Lord, is I'm going to trust in you and wait for your orders. And when I get your orders to do work, then I'll do work. But if I don't get your orders, I'm not gonna. Again, I think about Job. Job never once tried to fix his situation. He said, I'm waiting for God to come talk to me. Way to go, Job. I mean, come on, I would have been making some plans here. Way to go, Job. What grace, what humility, what surrender, that even in a time of such loss, hey, I'm just waiting to see what God will do. And when he tells me to go, I'll go. Waiting on the grace of God to move. How I wish Jacob had done that. But I do love Jacob's prayer. I wish he would have started with this prayer. This is a great prayer. There's a model here that you can use, that I can use. Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Yahweh, who said to me, go back to your land and to your family, and I will cause you to prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. Indeed, I crossed over the Jordan with my staff, and I have now become two camps. Please rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid of him. Otherwise he may come and attack me, the mothers and their children. You have said, I will cause you to prosper, and I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, too numerous to count. I like that. There's a formula there. I like that. The first thing he does is he remembers who he's talking to. You are the God who has called me. I am in this situation because of you. That's not a negative, that's a positive. I'm where you want me to be. I know how you have revealed yourself to me, and I'm resting in that. Now, he says, you have blessed me. He recalls the blessing. He remembers the grace. This is what you have done. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. That word there for faithfulness is the word hesed. You've probably heard that word. We really don't have an English equivalent to that word. It's really hard for us to put an equivalent to it. The King James calls it loving kindness that you've heard. Unconditional faithfulness, yeah, that's pretty good. It's kind of like the Old Testament version of agape love, except only God has the ability to delve out this hesed. It's just something that fantastic. We can reflect it. We can reflect it toward one another. But it's the kind of love that comes only from God, and it's unconditional, and it's full of grace. He says, this is what you've shown to me. When I crossed over the Jordan, all I had was a walking stick. And now look, I have so much stuff that I can divide them into two. So he remembers the grace. And then he presents his concerns to God, and he presents his concerns without mincing words. He says exactly what he's feeling. God's big enough to handle exactly what you're feeling. He says, rescue me from my brother Esau, for I am afraid of him. Otherwise, without your help, he'll come and attack me, the mothers and their children. I'm afraid for my children and for my wives. And then he reminds God of God's promise. I don't think he reminds God of God's promise because God forgot. I think he reminds God of God's promise because it helps him. He says, remember that you said, I will cause you to prosper, and I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, too numerous to be counted. Remember you said this, Lord. I'm counting on you for this. Love that. He remembers the grace of God. He shares his concerns with God. And he recalls the promises of God. That's fantastic. That's great. There's a great outline for, I wish he would have started with that when he saw the camps. Look what you've done, God. You've brought your camps. You've always taken care of me. Now I'm really concerned about this, but you've told me you're going to take care of me, and look at the camps. However, even after the prayer, he didn't wait around for God to tell him what to do. He goes back to the plan. He takes a bunch of stuff, 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their young, which I understand out of this list are the most valuable thing, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. He entrusted them to his servants as separate herds, so they split them up, and said to them, go on ahead of me and leave some distance between the herds. And he told the first one, when Esau meets you and asks, who do you belong to and where you're going, and whose animals are these ahead of you, then tell him, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and look, he is behind us. He told the second one and the third one, and everyone who was walking behind the animals, saying the same thing to Esau when you find him. You were to say, look, your servant Jacob is right behind us. For he thought, I want to appease Esau with the gift that's going ahead to me. After that I can face him, and perhaps he will forgive me. So the gift was sent on ahead of him, and he remained in the camp that night. And we'll probably end up stopping there. How interesting. How interesting that even though he is counting on God, he has a backup plan. Well, if Esau still wants to attack me, if he still wants to take my stuff, I'll give him a sizable gift. I did a little reading on that. It sounds like a lot. Apparently that was a pretty acceptably sized gift. If Jacob was generally as wealthy as he was, that was an acceptable gift for a liege to give to a king to keep them from conquering. Interesting. Interesting. Just in case Jacob's still mad, just in case God doesn't come through, I'm going to make sure I got a backup plan. Pardon me. Thank you. I'm going to make sure Jacob says, I'm going to make sure I got a backup plan to make Esau happy with me. Interesting. I don't have a ton of time to look onto the rest of this because I know that Wendy will cut me off in 2 or 3 minutes? I got 2 minutes? All right, I think we're probably just going to stop there. You guys know what comes next. Jacob wrestles with God. We're only going to touch on that really briefly. Not last Sunday. Today is the 30th, so the 20th. I spent Sunday morning talking about this Jacob wrestles with God concept. And I suggest if you're really curious about that, you look it up. It's on YouTube. It is perhaps the wackiest section in the entire Torah, the entire first 5 books of the Old Testament, is this section of Jacob wrestling with God. And I answer 3 of the biggest questions about that, about him wrestling with God. And what we discover is the man needed to surrender. God just needed Jacob to surrender. As long as Jacob's making backup plans and working a system, he's not in a spot where God can really do anything. He's not willing to surrender to the leadership of God. But as soon as he does surrender to the leadership of God and fully surrenders to the leadership of God and just lets God do what God needs to do, everything's fine. And that's what we're going to find out about next time when we meet together. Let's pray. Lord, how we thank you that you have led us through this point. I pray that we are listening to you and growing in you as we study through this book. Please continue to lead us.